Okay, I'm going to, got a couple minutes yet, but I'm going to start at least the, well, I'm going to start the learning sponsors first, okay? And then we'll get to the Gemara. The learning sponsors, a year of learning, Sue and Arnie Gerlich in memory of Malka Perlman and Philip Mann, and Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Beryl ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Yosef Meir ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Enya Rivka Pro Rosna Bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, and in memory of family murdered in the Holocaust, Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, sorry, Sarah Bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia Bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam Bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel Bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel Pinchas ben Harav Shimon, Sharon and Fred Lisker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edelbas Yaakov, Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Siddell, Irving and Pearl Kaplan, friends of Avi Gitler, Avrameir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler, China Bas Yeshaya, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova Bat Yisrael Dome, friends of Malka Levi, Malka Bat Yosef, friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef Ben Chaim, Charlie Gelfenstein and Sam Levine, in memory of Ramona Levine, Rachumata Bat Asher, a month of learning, okay, by Dov Bloodlander, in memory of his wife, Udal Bas Yehuda Tzvi, also by Mordechai and Miriam Burr, in memory of his father, Yaakov ben Mordechai, by the friends from Yarmouth E, in memory and commemoration of the Shloshim from Miriam and Michael Schiffer's son, Zev David ben Shimon Halevi. Okay. We also have today being the, 12th, 13th, we have a day of learning by Sharon Siegel in memory of her sister. I assume it's her brother, Aharon ben Bat Pesach Halevi. Yeah, it says her sister, Aharon. Right, we'll have to check on that one. Right. Today also, Rabbi Kranzler has a yortzeit in memory of his father, Yerachmiel ben Moshe Nachum. May the Neshamas have an aliyah, crank Rafia, Velti Yeshir Hashem Matzliah, and the Chol B'nai Yisrael a good Gebenshtian. Okay. Okay. Okay, we are going to do a little bit more than the regular daf today because we are sort of trying to move to the point that on Tisha B'Av we really should not be learning regular material. Okay, so I'm just explaining that briefly. Okay. Okay. So somebody asked, where are we? Right? Yes, I know. But I want to come back as an introduction to today's Gemara to the question that Mel asked the other day, which I never had a chance to answer properly. Okay, Mel? Do you remember the question? Right. Okay. And the answer seems to be that would machshava k'ma'aseh dami. Okay, is one's thought, okay, equivalent to one's action. Okay, and remember in the previous, we said that could have been a valid question. My answer would be in our previous examples when they were putting items inside that 20 Amma Sukkah, right? and then they were saying they weren't going to remove it. Would that have been enough? Or would they be necessary the fact that they did not complete it with any action? So that was really an underlying question that the Gemara never answered.
That was deeper.
What?
That was
Right.
deeper because we had the buffer stam,
Right.
which was without the.
Right. So we have, so it was a very good question. We didn't have a chance to answer it at the moment, but it was well asked. And the implication seemed to have been that that's a valid issue, okay? Because the Gemara doesn't seem to come to a conclusion on it, really, okay? All right, so I did want to, now, coming back to that, okay, we're going to be moving, remember we moved into the whole question of the 10th definition for the 10 tfachim, whether that, how did we get that? We saw the attempt to use the aron, okay? And whether that was going to be with its crown or its cover or things like that. Was that going to be the answer, right? Right? And then we all got into this long discussion about whether shiurim, whether the measurements, okay, were going to be Ha'ilacha Lamoshe Sinai, something that the Torah does not spell out, okay, but instead, okay, it was suggested, hold on, there's a verse in the Torah that cites a number of items, okay, it cites wheat, it cites barley, it cites olives, all these things, okay, isn't that verse there to give us these measurements? And we looked at the very first example, okay, which was the issue of, actually we looked at two, right, but I'm coming back, okay? We looked at the first example, which was wheat, okay? And we said, no, wheat is given there as a rationale to help us remember that if somebody goes into a house that has sara'at, that is afflicted, okay? The question is whether he's carrying his garments, okay, or not carrying, wearing the garments, has his jewelry on, not things like that. And the Gemara then on Vav Amud Aleph, okay, told us on the top of the Amud, which we covered, but I'm picking up there as part of our review, okay, that Hayalavush Kelav V'Sandalav B'Raglav, if he was wearing the garments and he had his shoes on his feet, V'Tabotav Be'etzba'otav, and he had his jewelry on his fingers, right? Interesting comment that men wore rings then, right? Hu tamei miyad, he himself physically becomes impure immediately. Vehein tohorin al sheyisheh b'kdei achilat pras. And these other items become tamei, depending on the amount of time that he's there in that house, okay? But it has to be enough time for him to eat a half a loaf of bread. Okay, all right. Now, is it just eating the bread? No, says the example. Pas chitin, it has to be bread made from wheat. Velo pas orin, not bread made from barley. Furthermore, mesav v'ochel beliftan. He must be dipping that bread into some sort of a dip, into some sort of a mixture. It was common, by the way, for them to eat it was kutach, it was called. It was a mixture of a variety of things. We won't go, okay, we won't go into it. Now, then the second example we saw from that verse was seorah, barley, okay? Right, so we're now on the fourth line, right, on that page, on Vav Amud Aleph. Okay, Seorah Ditznan. Why? What do we get the use of Seorah, barley? Ditznan, as the Mishnah teaches, Etzem Kiseorah, Mitameh b'maga u'b'masa ve'eno mitameh ba'ohem. That's where we left off yesterday, that if a barley corn, the size of was such that that measurement for a piece of flesh or bone, particularly bone, of a human being, that could convey ritual impurity, as a result, either by contact, by carrying, but it doesn't convey that ritual impurity when it's within an enclosed area of a facility. Now we're going to continue with the new material today, geffen. That was the next word that was in the verse. Kadei revi'it yayin l'nazir.
We're no longer concerned about the measurements of the.
We may get back to that, Sam. We may come back to that.
We mentioned the
Okay.
pasuk, so we gotta spell out the whole.
So what we have is the fact that the Gemara had raised the question that these measurements aren't according to the Torah. There was a challenge to that, that said basically, well, what about this verse? You cite this verse and it gives all sorts of basic understandings of measurements. So now we're exploring, this is a tangent, you're right, in that it exploring and clarifying the verse, which we hopefully then will ultimately, when that's finished, gets back to our discussion, of the sukkah measurements. So geffen, we said the in terms of a right there, kadei revi'it yayin l'nazir. So that's going to tell us when we deal with wine, a vine, which is the source of wine, we use wine as the questionable measurement to be able to clarify how much wine is such that that is prohibited for a Nazirite to drink. I think the comments say it's a quarter load, if I remember correctly. All right, so we get to the next example. Teina. What if that was the next word in the verse? Fig, right? Kigrogeret. It's about a dried fig measurement, the bulk of a dried fig. Lahotzaat Shabbat. That if one were to carry an item, carry a foodstuff or carry a package or whatever it is, outside, beyond Shabbat, the perimeter, then one would be held liable. Next, we're about a half a dozen lines down in Vav Amud Aleph. Rimon, that was the next word, pomegranate. Ditznan, it says, kol klei ba'alei batim shiurin karimonim. What do we use the measurement, so to speak, of a pomegranate for? When we say we have certain vessels that are earthenware, and if they become tameh, how do you purify them? What do you have to do? You have to break them. What is considered breaking? If it has a hole in it, the size of a pomegranate. So that is the case. That's that example. Eretz Zayat Shemanu Devash. We get to the next section from that pasuk. A land, right, that was flowing with oil and honey. That was date palm honey, right? Eretz Shekol Shiureha Kazeitin. So we're saying there that that's a land where basically the measurement there, is such that the land of Israel is always full of measurements that are equal to the size of an olive, because the olive was the common standard measurement that was used according to the Torah for foodstuffs. Going on. Kol shihoras al geda'atach, asks the Gemara. All the measurements are included in that reference to that pasuk. Ha ika hani da'amrinan. Right? But we've said that there were others. Ela ema sherov hashurim kazeitin. But we would say no, that the majority of the measurements are like olive amounts. So we get another example. Dvash, okay, now we're talking about date honey. What is that like? Kikotevet, that's the size of a large date. Okay, Hagasa, large, Biyom HaKippurim. So in other words, one who would eat something the size of a large date, okay, would be liable for eating on Yom Kippur. Now, exactly how much that is, there's a difference of opinion. We won't go into the in detail, but you should know that it's less than an egg, but more than an olive. So again, it's an intermediate measurement there. Alma, therefore, deraitaninhu. This would therefore seem to tell us that there are measurements that are designated from the Torah, which was a challenge to this, what we saw before. Okay, V'tisbara. Okay, so the Gemara now is going to pick up and continue and tell us. V'tisbara shiurin mikativi. Do you think that these measurements? Right.
It is, but it's not written.
Okay, we're going to get to that in 1 second. Good question, right? Okay, therefore, don't we say then that these are Torah mandated measurements? V'tispara shiurin miktivi. Do you think these measurements are written? Ela hilchatan minhu, but rather they are halacha Moshe Sinai. In other words, they were given to Moshe at Sinai just as the written Torah was given, but they were not included in the written Torah. That's the implication. But now the Gemara adds another statement here. Okay, ukra ismachta ba'almahu. And really, says the Gemara, this verse became maybe simply in quotes, and ismachta, okay, a support, right? Ismachta is like a hook. In other words, it's a way of helping the rabbis remember certain measurements, and maybe it is not actually the source for these measurements. Okay, now we continue. Now, remember we said there were 3 different items. There were shiurim, there were chatzitzin, interpositions, okay? And then there were mechitzot, there were partitions. Okay, where does this now come to the second? This is all still part of a tangent, remember. Chatzitzin deoraita ninhu. Do we say then that this issue of something that's an interposition, a separation, okay, is that from the Torah? We say that, dichtiv, why it's written. We have a pasuk that says, berachatz et bisaro, I include that, b'mayim, that he has to wash his hands with water. In other words, what? His body. Okay. All right. So the implication is whether it's hands, whether it's body. Let's take hands. I want to use that for the moment. Okay. Just as an example, we're dealing with the whole question of ritual impurity. So he has to have clean hands before he handles certain objects. All the more so. Okay, right. Okay. But now we're going to get to in a second. All right. Shelo yehe davar chotzetz beino lebein hamayim. Okay, so that in terms of the Torah, we're saying that his whole body can become tamei. Therefore, there must not be anything that blocks between parts of his body, his skin, his flesh, and the water. Now, what could come between one's body and the water? One good example would be hair. Okay, so let's see what happens. Ki atai hilchata, says the Gemara. Now, when we come to say that this is again a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, let's say our own. Maybe we're dealing with a concern about hair, right? Kiderabba bar Rav Chana, as was the view of Rabba bar Chana, the Amar Rabba bar Chana, who said, Nima achat kshura chotzetzet, that a single hair that becomes tied up or knotted, let's say things like that, is a break, is an interposition. Okay, right? Okay, shalosh. But if there are 3 hairs, einan chotzatzot, they don't form this interposition. They don't make a break. They don't form a block. I'm going to phrase it that way, to block the water from having contact. Why? Because 3 hairs, certainly there's got to be, the knot cannot be as tight, okay? And therefore water should be able to get through it, okay? Shtayim eini yodea. But 2 hairs that are knotted together, I don't know, he said. Okay, Saro Nami Deoraita Ninu. Okay, it would appear then that in regards to his hair, also we have a source from the Torah that tells us this. Dichtiv v'rachatz et b'saro b'mayim. Because the pasuk said he will wash his, I'm going to translate it, flesh, his body, okay, with water. Okay, so now the Gemara picks up and tells us, et hatafel lebisaro ma'iniu. Okay, in terms of that which is, what do we want to say? Auxiliary.
Subsidiary.
Okay, to his flesh. What about that? Umaynihu. So how do we clarify that? Sa'aro. Again, we're talking about his hair. Ki atai hilchata v'kedarabi Yitzchak. Okay, and when, in regards to the whole question of halacha l'Moshe Sinai, okay, are we talking here about Torah law, or are we talking about a law that may not be written in the Torah per se? According to Rabbi Yitzchak, the Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, as Rabbi Yitzchak says, and we go over the next Amud, right? The Bar Torah, that according to the Torah law, umakpid alav, okay, that where we have something that like a knot in the hair or something else, let's say one has, okay, could have mud, could have plaster, could have something else on his body, all right, that is chotzin. That serves as a block, as an interposition. V'she'eino makpid alav. However, if the person is not stringent about it himself, okay, if they don't consider it to be sawa, the grace of gedilla, so to speak, okay, what happens? Eino chotzeitz, then it's not considered to be a block, an interposition. V'gazru al rubo she'eino makpid, says the Gemara. And here we see that the rabbis made a decree, okay, that that they made a decree that one has to be concerned about it, okay, in terms of it being an interposition over his whole body. Va'al miuto hamakpid, okay, mishum rubo hamakpid, and they even carried further that that decree that one need to be concerned about it, okay, because of even if there's a small amount blocking on the skin. V'ligzor nami al miuto she'eino makpid mishum miuto hamakpid. So maybe the rabbi should also make a further decree, suggests the Gemara, even for that little amount that one isn't concerned about, for that little amount that they might be concerned about. Inami, right?
Rabbi, in Megillah Esther, we learned that they would cover somebody's body in all sorts of oils and creams and whatever else. Would that be considered a problem then? And if it is, then how do you get it off to immerse yourself?
Putting oil and stuff on was not a problem because that was absorbed generally by the body.
Okay.
All right. So what happens? Inami mishum rubo she'eino makpid. If also then because of the question of most of the body where one might not be stringent about it. Who? All right. So the Gemara picks up. He gufa gzera. But that in and of itself is a decree. Okay. All right. And so the Gemara is going to tell us va'anan nikum v'nigzor gzera legzera. Should we then go ahead and make a decree on something that's already a decree? We don't do that. We don't do that, says the Gemara. Okay. So now we get to that third and final item that was part of the,
So
Item.
since we can't make a gezerah, and since if you were talking about logic, there's no other way to say that a small chatzitza that you don't care about is still problematic. This is all an indirect proof that it's all halacha l'moshe.
okay.
You can't do a gezerah.
All right.
Apparently we do, so it had to be halacha l'moshe.
Okay. So in other words, the implication clearly is if it's not found therefore in the Torah, number one. Number two, if we can't make a rabbinic decree on it, number two, therefore, where do we get it from? That's the implication of Michael's point. Okay, that it therefore has to be halacha l'moshe misina. Okay. Third item, umechitzin, and now we're talking these partitions, right? Hada Amran, as we've said. Okay. Ha nechla Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so that's according to Rabbi Yehuda. Ela the Rabbi Meir, my ikala meima. So what are you going to say though about the view there of Rabbi Meir? Okay, ki atai hilchata. When it comes, right? If you say it's halacha l'moshe misina, the good, lavud. Okay, all right, v'dofen akuma. Okay, there, right, we might say that it's a question there of what would Rabbi Meir argue. He could come back to us and say, hold on a second. You want to say that there's halacha l'moshe misinai? I'll agree that it applies in certain areas. Maybe it applies to the example of good, namely extending the wall of the sukkah, right? Maybe it applies to lavud, where we're talking about joining, okay, between two over an empty space. And maybe it applies to dofen akuma, okay, to that curved bent wall, right? Okay. Having said all of this, what happens? Notice there's a colon there in the Gemara that tells us we've stopped the discussion on so far on that topic, and we're moving to a new topic from the Mishnah. What would be our next topic? Instead of jumping all the way back to look at the Mishnah all over again, I'm going to tell you the Mishnah was quoted, She'ein la shalosh defano. We're now going to get to the second aspect that the Mishnah talked about, namely walls. Okay? We talked about height, how tall, how short. Okay, that was what the Mishnah did at first. Now we're going to deal with walls. Remember, we still haven't discussed yet the third criteria of the Mishnah, which was shade. Okay, all right, we'll get there eventually. Okay, all right, but now we're dealing with walls. Now, does this get complicated? Of course. I had to make myself my own diagram because I couldn't find it in the book. Okay? Plus, I have the book with me. Plus, I want us to know that I believe that there's a difference in the diagrams between Koren and art school.
That's
Okay.
because it's
Okay?
complicated.
So let me, before we started, just a word of explanation and then we'll jump in. We've always been talking so far about a sukkah that has 3 walls. Okay? And we said it was I won't call it a U shape, but okay?
2 right angles.
Okay? That kind of a situation. All right? Steve, if you look up here, you'll see my hands there. Okay? A like right angled U. Okay? Now, what happens now when the Gemara tells us, hey, that third wall, okay, how much does it have to be? Our 2 walls, we know those have to be a certain standard size. What's that standard size? Let's say it's 7 tfachim. I'm just throwing out a number for right now,
7.
okay? All right, just to keep it, all right? What about that third wall? Okay, all right, what does it have to be? Well, right, as Sid said, the Mishnah mentioned that it had to be a tefach. Right, okay, I've now got a measurement on that. How do I attach and where do I attach that third little shtickle wall, that little extra piece of 1 tefach? Do I do it, okay, so that it's, okay, if this is, oh, this is gonna be nothing like, all right? Here's my 3 wall, right? This is my 3 wall. Okay,
All right,
I do this third wall so that it's, so to speak, parallel to this wall.
And touching 1.
Okay, all right. Do I do it that way? Or maybe I can say I don't have to make it parallel. Maybe I stick it so that it's diagonal. Okay, in that way.
I mean perpendicular.
Okay,
Yeah.
That's not until top.
I know. I'm just going through a few options.
But if you do it, then it doesn't look like a wall.
Well, but I've got a stickle something. It's still coming out of here. Okay, oh, wait a second, Mr. Sid. Okay, maybe what I'm gonna do is I have the 2 walls. And I'm gonna take a board and I'm gonna stick a board over here. And that board is large enough to say, oh, maybe it's 4. Okay, let's say it's 4 tfachim, and the amount of empty space between this wall and what's isn't here is just 3.
Love it.
Okay, and I use Lavud. So maybe I have a number of different options to say, how do I attach a third wall? Okay, that's the whole continuation of the Gemara with a number of suggestions that we're going to look at, right?
Plus
Okay.
Reb Shimon to throw it on.
Okay, right. We're going to see one of the sages is going to throw out 2 suggestions. Okay, not enough that I could give 1. Okay, so naturally, what are we going to have? What's going to happen? If the same rabbi gives 2 suggestions, what are you going to ask? Which one is right, or why did he have to give 2, or things like that? So we've now ready to go into the text. So the Mishnah said, "V'she'ein la shalosh tefanot," if it doesn't have 3 walls. Tanu Rabbanan, and we now get to a Mishnah. I'm sorry, a Braita, as we move along. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan, the first Braita says, "Shtayim kihilchatan." 2 of them are standard, the walls. What do we mean by standard? Okay, that they are basically, okay, 7 roughly tfachim.
Well, anyway, they define the size.
Close, right? Ushlishit, and the third wall, afilu tefach, at least 1 tefach, as Sid said. Right? Rabbi Shimon Omer, here's the first suggestion by Rabbi Shimon. Shalosh kehilchatan. He says, no, he says, the 3 walls are standard, ureve'it afilu tefach. And the 4th wall has to be at least a tefach, 1 handbreadth. But my kemiflage, what are they arguing about? Rabbanan savle. The rabbis are of the opinion, yesh aim lemasoret, that we have this concept that we follow the biblical text, okay, the way it is written. Rabbi Shimon Savar, and Rabbi Shimon says, yesh aim lemikra. He says, no, we follow the biblical text the way it is read. Okay? Now, this is a common machloket in other places. It's the first time some of us may be seeing it here, but the Gemara is going to at least help spell it out for us a little bit more. Namely, what's the case? Yesh aim lemasor. We have preference to the way the text is written. Namely, 3 times in the verses, we see the word basukot. Okay, I'm not going to cite all 3 verses, okay, but if you have it in the notes in the art school, okay? Basukot, basukot, bisukot, 3 times. What do we see as the difference between those 3 times? In the 3rd example, we have a vav, which tells us that's clearly plural. So because we have besukot 1 time, that may be 1 wall. Besukot a 2nd time, that may be 2 walls. Besukot with the plural, that tells me that's at least 2 walls. That gives me 4 walls. So therefore, I need at least something that shows, according to Rabbi Shimon, a 4th wall. Okay, that might be his view. Hare kan arba, that gives me 4. What does the Gemara tell us? Dal chad legufe, remove 1 for itself, namely for the purpose of the mitzvah, to tell me that, okay, that is what I need, that I need to have, the sukkah needs to have walls. Therefore, pashu lahot flata, therefore 3 are left. Shtayim kehilchatan, 2 that are standard, va'atai hilchata, and therefore comes halach lemoshe misina, v'garata lishlishit, v'okma atefach. Okay, and what happens, and it reduces then, so to speak, the 3rd wall and establishes it as a measure of a tefach. That is the thinking of the rabbis. Okay, going on. Rabbi Shimon Savar. Rabbi Shimon holds the following, right? Yesh aim lemikra. We give preference to the way the text is read. Besukot, besukot, besukot. It's read even in those places where it's written without the vav, it's still read as plural. Okay? And so therefore I get 2, 2, 2. Therefore I get 6. Hare kan sheish. And therefore 6. Dal chad kra legufe. Again, I remove 1 version to tell me for it itself, namely for the purpose of the mitzvah, again, that it has to have walls, right? Pashulaho arba. That therefore takes me down to 4. Shala.
You take away 1 word.
Right, you take away 1 word because that is for the mitzvah. Okay, one phrase, 1 pasuk. Okay, so therefore that gives me down to 4. All right, shalosh kehilchatan, says Rabbi Shimon. 3 of them have to be standard size. Atai hilchata, v'gar'ata l'revi'it, v'okamta atefach. Therefore, I comes halacha l'moshe misinai again, and it reduces it down to 4. At the 4th wall, what happens? I establish that as a tefach. So that is the basis for their argument. V'ibayat ema. And now the Gemara gets a little more complicated. If you want to say, right, the kuli alma yesh aim lemikra, if you want to say that everybody is willing to say that the preference is given to the way it's read, okay, bahacha miflage, then this is what they're arguing about. Mar savar sachacha ba'ekra, that one master holds that the covering of the, right, the ceiling, the roofing has to be, right, does not require, right, what happens? By Ikra, that it requires a verse. Umar savar sachacha lo ba'ikra. And the other master holds that it does not, that this requirement of the covering of the schach does not require a verse. Or, says the Gemara, vibayit ema. If you want, I would say, again, right? The kuli alma yesh aim lamasoret. That everybody is going to say, we give preference to the, right? Masoret, right here, okay, to the tradition, right? Which in this case means how it's written, right? To the way it's read. Bahacha bahaka miflageh. And we say this is what they're arguing about. Mar savar ki atai hilchata. One master holds that when we talk about halacha l'moshe misinai, right, lagera, all right, that it's to reduce it. Umar savar ki atai halchata lehosi. And the other master holds that the halacha l'moshe misinai comes to add on. The ibayat ema, and if you want, I would say, the kuli alma ki atai hilchata, that when everybody says the halacha l'moshe misinai, lega re'ah, all right? Again, it comes to reduce. V'yesh aim l'masoret, and therefore we follow the preference to the, right, what's written, all right? V'hacha b'dorshin tchilot k'miflageh. And here what happens, that we're saying that we are dealing with how we interpret the biblical verse and whether the first statement in the order of common statements is included in the expounding of the verse. Okay? Kemiflageh, that's what they're arguing about. Namely, Mar Savar, one of them holds, right? Dorshim Tchilot, that the first time a word is mentioned in the Torah, okay, it is included and used for the expounding. And in this case, it's done for the sake of the mitzvah.
I think that's because it's plural.
Well,
you
could
could say
be.
Part of it is the
Could be.
definition and part is.
Okay,
the
that's
plural.
not what Corindon
I
suggests.
know.
right?
but-
Okay. Okay. Umar Savar Ein Dorshim Tchilot. Right? And the other master holds, all right, that first word is by itself and it's not included, okay, in the situation. In other words, we don't expound that particular use of the term, of that word. Now, what happens? We get now to, again, another side discussion. Rav Matna Amar Ta'ameh, the Rabbi Shimon Mihacha. Rav Matna suggesting that he would teach Rabbi Shimon's answer that he suggested before, that it had to be a fourth wall, okay, based on the following, from a different pasuk, a different verse. Namely, what's the verse? V'sukkah tiyeh letzeil yomam mechorev u'lemechze u'lemistor mizerem u'mematar. Okay, I'm just going to translate the pasuk, and there will be a sukkah as a shade from heat in the daytime, as a protection and refuge from storm and from rain. Okay, now notice how many statements we have here. Heat in the daytime is one. Protection in this, okay, is two. Then refuge from storm and from rain. Do we say that's simply a third example? Or do we say that is a third and a fourth example? Okay, everybody with me? All right. Okay. Va'oto tefach. Hey, so now, so he's just simply derived Rabbi Shimon's interpretation from a different verse in a different way. Okay, everybody? Let's go on now. Back to a new subject. Va'oto tefach Hechan ma'amido. Now we're back to what I said here. Where do we put that third or that fourth, according to Rabbi Shimon, that little shtickle tefach of wall? Where does it stick out? Okay, does it go parallel? Does it go diagonal? Where does it, how does it stand, right? That's the question the Gemara is now going to follow. All right? Okay. Amar Rav. Rav suggests the following. Ma'amido keneged hayotze. It extends, right, at the end of the standing walls, opposite the wall that emerges. Okay, now is that clear? Wasn't clear to me. Okay, and apparently it's not clear to the Mefarshim either. Okay, all right. So do I say, as I'm going to pass this around, that it's pointing toward the opposite wall, and therefore it's almost like it's going to be a triangle? Or do I say that it's like parallel to the opposite wall? And I will just pass this around, okay, so that you can see. Okay, and that's based on the diagram in the Koren explanation, okay? Okay, now,
Why would you not say it's parallel? A normal wall is parallel.
I don't know, okay? Because he said towards the wall that's extending. Okay, right? It's opposite the wall that extends, that emerges. That's what Rav said. Okay. Look, ma'amido keneged hayotze. Right? That which, and I'm reading you right from the Koren, at end of standing walls, opposite the wall that emerges.
Opposite means
Yeah,
opposite.
you don't know.
Parallel. Opposite is facing.
I'm just telling you.
The triangle building in New York, where they had the church factory burned. It's 3 walls.
Right? Okay, so now you're going to see why it's a problem. Okay, Amarle Rav Kahana. So Rav Kahana, the Rav Asi, both say to Rav as follows. If that's your explanation, let's go over to Zion Amud Aleph. Okay, we're going to do this a little bit. V'ya'amidenu keneged rosh tor. Then you're making it, okay, like it's the head of an ox. All right, a diagonal. And if you look up and look in, if you're using Art Scroll, okay, on 77A1 in the Rashi, you will see what it shows as a diagonal. That third little wall is a diagonal towards the longer wall and not parallel. Okay, and that's why the Gemara says it's like the horns of an animal. The horns come out and then curve. Okay, that's how I understood the Rashi there. By the way, not everybody agrees with that explanation in Rashi. What happens? Shatik Rav. Rav was silent. Right? Now, he could be silent for a couple reasons. He could be silent because he agrees. He could be silent because he doesn't have an answer. Okay? Or what, Mel? Or he could, right, or he could disagree, but because there were 2 colleagues, right, Rav Kahana and Rav Asi, who challenged him, he didn't want to speak out. So so again, Mefarshim say his silence doesn't tell us, prove anything. Okay, all right, now we can go on. Itmar, Nami, it was also said, Amar Shmuel Mishmei de Levi, that Shmuel said in the name of Levi, Ma'amido kineged hayotze. We set it up opposite the wall that extends. So it's clear that Shmuel in the name of Levi is telling us that that little tefach wall should be parallel.
Yeah.
Okay, parallel. Whereas that's why the question of what Rav was saying. Okay, and notice what happens. The Gemara then tells us. V'chein morin be midrasha, and likewise it was taught in the base midrash. Ma'amido keneged hayotze, that we set up that third tefach wall. Okay, again parallel to that extended wall. Rabbi Simon, okay, v'itema Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Amar. Okay, so now we have another example, another view. All right, the following. What does Rabbi Simon in the name of Rabbi, and others say Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi say? Oselo tefach sochek. He gives what we might call an expanded, a laughing wall. Laughing in the sense of we smile, we extend our face. So that's an extended wall. Okay, in other words, it's got to really be more than just a tefach. Umamido pepachot mishloshat tefachim, and we set it up, right? How much? Okay, a little bit more, right? In that case, within 3 tefachim of the fuller wall, right? Right? V'kol pachot mishlosha samuch v'dofen kilvud dami. And we say that therefore that anything, so long as a space is less than 3 tefachim, we apply the principle of joining of levud. Right? Amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda. Sukkah ha'asuya kemabui kshera. We're now going to get another different example. Okay, what do we have here? Okay, again, look at Rashi. Okay, we're looking at the example of 2 walls, 2 parallel walls. That's the second example in Rashi on 7a1. Okay, right? What happens? He says that sukkah can be kosher, right? Va'oto tefach. And therefore, what do we have? We make 1 small wall. That's a tefach. Mamido l'chol ruach sheyirtzeh. And one can put it up at either direction that one wants. So if I have 2 parallel, right? I can put it either above or, so to speak, below. Okay, east or west, north or south, depending on where my parallels are. Okay. Okay. Now we come back to what we saw before. Rabbi Simon says another statement. Remember, this is the same Rabbi Simon we just had on the previous page that said it needed 4 walls. Okay, what is he telling us now? Rabbi Simon v'aitema Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and others say it was Rabbi Shimon ben Levi. The following: Oselo pas. He takes a board. Okay, that's all right. That's the next picture down in the Rashi. Okay, and he sticks a board that's 4 tefachim wide. Now, if we say that the normal wall, standard wall, is 7, and you stick a board there that's 4, how much do you have left on either side? You got 1.5. And that's less than the 3 that we would need to satisfy the requirement of the wood. And so therefore, that board of 4 tefachim, and we include the wood on either side of it, satisfies the requirement, would seem to satisfy the requirement of a 3rd wall.
When you apply that, I always thought it was, if you had 2 boards that you could have to make a little, you have the, And now you're saying, well, it doesn't need another end?
That's a good point. Good question, Gary. Okay, we usually apply the two in examples of Shabbat. Right here, we're applying not in Shabbat, in Sukkah, and apparently, according to Rabbi Shimon or Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, that for tefach board would be sufficient.
Does that
And we-
hold up?
Well, you
Yeah.
stick it in the ground.
You're talking about two parallel walls, so you put it in the middle, you have one over here and one over here.
So you actually have,
One on each
you have
side.
the end of the middle board and the end of the standard board. Okay? It's like,
It's diagram Dalet in the Rashi.
right. Okay,
Then here's the-
Oh,
So
okay.
then you have
Right.
this way and that.
Oh, okay. I was looking at the diagram
right,
B in the picture.
right, okay.
That's what-
So he says you take the board, you put it there. Umashu mamido b'pachot mishlosha samuch l'dofen. And then the Gemara continues to clarify for us. B'chol pachot mishlosha samuch l'dofen kilavud dami. And that's how we would apply lavud. Now, so the Gemara is going to ask an interesting question, and then with this, we're going to finish up today. Umayishna, what's the difference? Hatam, there, okay? When Rabbi Shimon gave his first suggestion, okay? The Ka'amart, Sagya Tefach Soche, when he said it was enough to say an extended Tefach, Umayishna Hacha, and what's the difference here? The Ka'amart Ba'aye Pas Arba'ah, that he says we need to put this board of 4 tfachim. So the Gemara is going to try to answer that. Okay, Hatam there in that case when we just put it the extended, tefach, the ika shtei defnot kehilchatan, that there's 2 walls that are standard, sagile b'tefach soche. It's sufficient to have simply an extended tefach. Hacha, here in our case, the lekashtei defnot, where you don't have really 2, so to speak, standard walls. Ika pas arba'ah, if you have this board for tefach, and yes, it's okay. Elo, lo. And if not, it's not. And that's where we're going to stop today, and we'll pick up tomorrow. Okay?
Yes. Very good. Yes.